but health workers, nurses, people that we need to, people who pack supermarket shelves, turn out to be the people we need in this crisis. And if they need some way of accommodating their children during the day, then I think governments need to make that available. But other than that, school is shut effectively. And also, again, it comes down to communication. How do you communicate to your child that, no, you can't go to the beach because it's not safe? No, you can't go to the supermarket or to the shopping mall, but the government's telling you it's safe to go to school. I mean, again, it makes communication incredibly difficult.
And look, the teachers too have been very anxious about this situation as well, and it's the teachers' unions that have been putting a fair bit of pressure on the states to move down the path of more shutdowns as well. Different states, different positions from some of the unions here. And just on that point, Mark, I thought it was fascinating yesterday in the Australian newspaper, front page story about Sally McManus, Secretary of the ACTU, and how well she's working with Christian Porter, the IR Minister, two that have never had much in common or got on particularly well now. They were gushing in praise of each other in this article. Look, it's been suggested to me by some in Labor that that's a bit of a signal from the union movement that they are cooperating with the government, and some are a little worried that Anthony Albanese's perhaps gone a little too far in making partisan points this week. What did you make of that?
Well, look, just on the article, I thought it was fantastic to see that quote from Christian Porter saying that if you'd asked him a few weeks ago if he'd end up being BFF with Sally McManus, he would have thought that was unimaginable.
Strange times indeed.
Yeah, and it is strange times indeed, and that does speak obviously to those extraordinary situations and arrangements that are having to be made. Everything's being recalibrated, no doubt about that. As to the question of where the sorry, what was your question? I've lost it.
I just picked up within Labor. Some contacted me this week to say they were a little concerned about how hard Anthony Albanese was going. I mean, we've talked about the position here generally, but the suggestion was have a look at what the union movement's doing and the signal that sends from that piece about Sally McManus in particular.
Yeah, well, I think that's obviously the case that the union movement is operating very sort of hand in glove with the government. I think, to be fair, so is the opposition. I think there's a bit of a rhetorical divide here, as well as a policy divide. It is true that there have been some alternative positions put by Anthony Albanese. He is advocating going harder, for example. If you need to do something, if you're planning to do it in a week, do it now, all that sort of stuff. But I don't think the government can have it both ways here. We note that we have this thing called the National Cabinet, which the federal government trumpets as this brilliant national thing. It's all bipartisan and so forth. But Scott Morrison made a point of not having Anthony Albanese on that cabinet, right? Even though they sort of style it as a wartime cabinet. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you're not on the cabinet because you're the opposition, but you can't behave like an opposition. So I think, and it is appropriate that we do have at least some level of robust debate. Yeah, particularly because we don't have Parliament sitting at the moment.
I'm going to just show you a couple of things internationally because, of course, this is playing out all over the world and there are a couple of, well, unmissable moments this week. Donald Trump, look, he's been a bit of a weather vane, I think, so far in this crisis. Sometimes he's been very clear and taking it very seriously and sounding strong. Other times, have a look.
I'd love to have it open by Easter. Okay, I would love to have it open by Easter. I will tell you that right now. I would love to have that. It's such an important day for other reasons, but I'll make it an important day for this too. I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
James, that's 2 weeks from now. Can't see it happening, but the other one I wanted to mention was Boris Johnson. He's been a little choppy on this as well. He has obviously become a lot more seriously minded about this whole crisis, pretty strict lockdowns, the wage subsidy plan as well. And now, of course, we know the British Prime Minister himself has contracted the coronavirus. Apparently the symptoms mild and so on. I know Barry Cassidy actually tweeted this, posing the question. Have a look at these comments from early March from Boris Johnson. May give us a hint as to how he contracted it.
Well, I can tell you that I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands. And I think it's very important that we, people obviously can make up their own minds. I think that Matt has said that people must make up their own minds, but I think the scientific evidence is, well, I'll hand over to the experts. But our judgment is wash. Washing your hands is the crucial thing.
Yeah, I think most would now agree, probably not a good idea to shake hands with someone who's got
positions evolving.
Positions evolving, exactly. All right, our panel, James Campbell, Lenore Taylor and Mark Kenny, will be back shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with the photographer in Canberra for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, Alex Ellinghausen. Strange days, Alex.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Well, we saw the week kick off, Alex, with Bondi Beach being completely covered in people.
Yeah, I mean, initially people were asked to use their common sense and to observe social distancing, and clearly a lot of people did not.
It was one day of sitting. It ended up being on Monday.
The House of Representatives is arguably one of the hardest places to social distance.
Yep.
So the presiding officers had to limit the number of people in the chambers. We had a reduced number of MPs coming to Parliament.
They couldn't sit in their normal seats, and everyone was little bit discombobulated. They were going to the wrong seats and to maintain the social distance that they needed. You have a theory about Peter Khalil and Luke Gosling.
Oh, look, they have been known to be a little bit more boisterous than others during sitting and can be a little bit louder. So I'm just curious whether it was an accident that the two of them were seated closer to the door on this particular occasion.
Do you think less distance to travel when they were 94A?
Possibly, but it kind of almost resembles a little bit of a naughty corner, doesn't it?
Did you find the tone of Parliament good?
You can tell that everybody is under a lot of stress at the moment. Like our colleagues in the press gallery, people are getting snappy with each other over tiny little things. And even the Prime Minister during a press conference, a flash irritated him.
We are not. It was interesting to see the hand sanitisers next to the Hansards on the desk. They had it everywhere, and everyone partook.
At this point in time, you really can't sanitise your hands enough, can you?
No, not really. They've started to use the main committee room, which is a much bigger room for press conferences, and it allows us to, as the media, to spread out properly and observe the social distancing, because it's really hard, isn't it?
People often think of NRL and AFL as a full contact sport, and not many people are aware of how much body contact we have with each other during many of these media scrums.
Alex, in times of national crisis, some politicians really rise up to the occasion, and then there's Stuart Robert. He really is the Wile E. Coyote of the ministerial wing, isn't he? He launches an anvil most days, which comes back and hits him on the head.
It's a beautiful David Rowe cartoon of him coming in like a wrecking ball. But it really comes under that category of politicians trying to explain technology to us.
Yep.
It always seems to end up badly.
Meanwhile, in Germany, I kind of find it rather reassuring that Angela Merkel does her own shopping.
Does she have toilet paper in there?
Yeah, there's toilet paper in there.
Yeah, well, I think the 4 bottles of wine are definitely appropriate at this point in time.
Hugh Remington tweeted this on your photo: biggest crisis since World War II, and we're told no need for Parliament until August.
August seems like such a long way to go when everybody seems to be living day by day and not knowing what's going to even happen this weekend.
Alex, it's been a great pleasure unpicking this very historic week in Parliament, and I'll let you do the honours.
Thank you, Mike. Back to you, Spewsy.
All right, time for some final observations. Mark, to you first.
Well, it's just interesting that we are moving so quickly. That Boris Johnson clip just shows how fast events change and what policies need to change. We now have the government considering this idea of, supporting income directly. That's interesting in itself. It'd be good to see them also consider income contingent loans for business, a bit like the HEX scheme. My colleagues at ANU, Bruce Chapman and Warwick McKibben, have done a lot of work on that, and I don't think it's on the table at the moment for the government, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is an answer down the track, because it allows businesses to come back carrying a debt for which they do not have to meet any repayments until they get to a certain income level. So it's certainly something that could get considered.
Well, I'm sure nothing's off the table right now. Lenore?
I find it really reassuring that we're having a sober, responsible debate about the responses to this momentous crisis within the National Cabinet, between the Premiers and the Prime Minister, between the opposition and the government and in the media. I think that is absolutely appropriate given how big an issue this is and how long-lasting the impacts of these decisions will be. And whenever I look at the United States, I thank goodness that we're having the debate that we are.
Very good point. James?
I'll give you two. One, quickly, I think that there's going to have to be a discussion about the fact that public servants are getting paid for their full whack when just about everybody else in the country is taking a haircut. There's going to have to be some discussion about sharing the pain to people who work in the public sector. But I think the story in the next week is going to be what's happening in what we used to call the third world, India, Indonesia. We haven't really seen much out of there. I think the governments have been quite quiet about it in some places. There's not been a lot of reporting. Some of the stories that are starting to emerge from the death of healthcare workers in poor countries suggest that there's a real train occurring there.
As Lenore says, you'd rather be here than a lot of those places, many of them on our doorstep. All right, thank you all. Now, last week, Tanya Plibersek kicked off our new series of how to wash your hands to your favourite song. And she challenged Michael McCormack for this week. So here is the Deputy Prime Minister and well-known Elvis tragic. Thanks for watching.
Well, you know I can be found sitting all alone. If you can't come around, at least please telephone. Self-isolate if you have to. And if I made you mad for something I might have said, everyone wash your hands to prevent the spread.
Adam Band, challenge is now yours. Show us how you wash your hands to prevent COVID-19.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.
Just